You're welcome. Well, some new questions today about North Korea's motives as a nuclear-armed state, and they come as that country continues a two-day celebration of its first leader's birthday. Now, just this weekend, Secretary of State John Kerry said the United States is open to talks with North Korea so long as it begins to abandon its nuclear program. But there are some growing concerns whether or not Kim Jong-un's regime has reached the point of no return. A recent report in the New York Times says this, quote, other officials have said in background interviews that Mr. Kim is trying to get North Korea into the same position as Pakistan and acknowledge nuclear power that the West has given up hopes of disarming. Frank Gaffney is president of the Center for Security Policy and formerly served in the Defense Department during the Reagan administration. And Joe Cirincione is president of the Plowshares Fund and the author of Bomb Scare: The History and Future of Nuclear Weapons. Nice to have both of you back.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Joe, let me start with you. So you have one United States official saying publicly that he hopes that North Korea disarms and there's a denuclearization of the region overall. But you have officials saying in the background that they're really concerned that North Korea is past the point where that's even possible. What do you think?
The official position of the United States and Japan and South Korea and China is that we have to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. North Korea must disarm. But everybody recognizes that's not going to happen anytime soon. Clearly, North Korea wants to win acceptance as a nuclear state. That is not going to happen. The United States is never going to recognize North Korea as a nuclear state. It's not going to reproduce the mistakes we made in Pakistan, where we looked the other way, and now Pakistan has over 100 nuclear weapons. North Korea has somewhere between 6 and 8 nuclear weapons. We are never going to let them get to Pakistan's level.
How, Frank, are we not going to let them do that?
Well, I don't have a clue. I don't think Joe does either, and I'm afraid that simply insisting that they don't have nuclear weapons isn't a strategy. I mean, I think we all can hope that they will disarm, but it's kind of like this idea that the rest of the world will do so too. It isn't going to happen, and my concern is that hope is not a strategy. We're looking at a world that is far from denuclearizing, with the notable exception of the United States, going in very much the opposite direction. Every country that we have to be concerned about is either getting nuclear weapons or modernizing the ones that they do, and North Korea is simply a case in point. And there's one other place in which I think the parallel to Pakistan is apt. The North Koreans are likely to follow the Pakistani lead in becoming what you might call nukes are us, trying to sell as a sort of cash crop, if you will, their nuclear technology to still other nations that aspire to go down that road as well. And the truth of the matter is, if you look at what we're doing as we respond to this North Korean crisis, it's clear we're already treating them as a nuclear weapon state, not like we did Muammar Gaddafi's Libya or Saddam Hussein's Iraq, for that matter.
So, Joe, I'd love you to weigh in on what Frank just said there, but add this point as well. Jennifer Griffin has some interesting reporting top of the hour, as she always does, and she said there's some questions inside the Pentagon whether or not North Korea even has an accurate map of the United States. So in some cases, are we actually giving them too much credit, too much attention? You know, does the attention that we're giving them and the credit we're giving them match the threat?
Well, that's an excellent point, Jen, and frankly, I think there's been some hyperventilating about the North Korean nuclear threat. They do not have a missile that can reach the United States. They do not have a warhead that can fit on that missile and withstand the re-entry vibrations and pressures. So they're not a direct nuclear threat to us. They do have nuclear weapons. They could smuggle them out in the belly of a cargo ship, but we're in somewhat of a panic about this, and that feeds into the North Korean game plan. So how do you stop them from becoming a nuclear power? We've seen some very effective techniques applied by Republicans and Democratic presidents in the past, including the agreed framework agreement of the 1990s that stopped the plutonium production, stopped North Korea from making the core of a bomb. That agreement lasted 8 years, and it's the reason that North Korea only has 6 to 8 nuclear weapons now and not 100. If we hadn't had that agreement, they would be the size of Pakistan by now. So even though the agreement collapsed under the Bush administration, it stopped them in the process. The facilities deteriorated in the course of those 8 years. Now the key is to stop them from reopening them. There's a deal to be made there. They want some things for us. I think we should be willing to trade them in order to keep that plant closed. No more bombs.
And Frank, Secretary Kerry essentially said he's willing to redo talks again. Now, we should mention last year at this time, we also sat down for some talks in Beijing. And then a couple months later, that's when the missile tests began. So we have seen a pattern develop. But what do you think about Joe's point that we go back a little further in history, maybe there is a model to follow?
Well, look, we can talk to them till we're blue in the face, and we can actually close down some of their facilities at considerable expense, by the way, in terms of political legitimacy and other kinds of concessions. And we have. The trouble is that despite all of that, they have 6 to 8, or God only knows how many nuclear weapons, and they're going to get more, and they're going to put them on missiles. And by the way, there is a satellite that is circling the Earth right now that, if it has a nuclear weapon on board, could be used to deliver a devastating electromagnetic pulse attack against this country. So these are things that we can't ignore or pretend aren't real simply because they don't fit the construct of a world that I know Joe would like to see arrive, of one without nuclear weapons. It isn't so. It isn't becoming so, and pretending it's so does not make us safe. And I think the American people have enough common sense to recognize that's not a formula for their security or for that of other nations that rely on us for our defense.
Joe, I'll give you a chance to respond to that when we start with our next segment, because we'd love to have both back again in the future. Sorry to leave it there. I know you get you both going, Jenna. But I appreciate both of your thoughts, and you guys make a great pair on television. So thank you so much. We look forward to having you back.
Thank you, Jenna.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Coming up, an airplane slams into the sea.